August 15, 2012, 7:43 in the morning. A Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance team watches Terminal G at Honolulu International Airport. Flight 68 from Hong Kong just landed. The target is in Seat 12 Alpha, Jerry Chun Shing Lee. He is 53 years old. Lee is a former Central Intelligence Agency case officer. The surveillance logs show he is carrying one rolling suitcase, a black Samsonite. It is standard traveler luggage. To casual observers, there is nothing suspicious. However, inside that bag are two small notebooks. They contain handwritten entries. These entries include the true names of Central Intelligence Agency assets. They also list phone numbers for covert facilities and meeting locations across China. The notebooks contain secrets worth more than lives. They hold the architecture of American intelligence operations in the world's most hostile surveillance state. Lee does not know that Federal Bureau of Investigation agents have been tracking him for months. He does not know they have already obtained a sealed warrant from a federal judge in Virginia. Furthermore, he does not know that in 6 hours, when he checks into his layover hotel in Honolulu, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents will enter his room while he is at dinner. They will photograph every page of those notebooks. They will forensically image the thumb drive in his luggage. They will also find a document he created 2 years earlier on his laptop. This document was marked secret. It describes Central Intelligence Agency operational assignments and sensitive facilities. He transferred this document to that thumb drive and then tried to delete it. However, deletion does not always mean gone. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's digital forensics team will recover it from the unallocated space. Lee thinks he is on a routine trip to Virginia for job interviews with the Central Intelligence Agency. He believes his old employer might rehire him. He has no idea he is walking into the final stages of a counterintelligence investigation. This investigation started when Chinese intelligence systematically began executing American spies. They were killed one by one. At least 20 sources were killed or imprisoned between 2010 and 2012. One of them was shot in a government courtyard. This happened in front of colleagues, sending a clear message. This was the worst intelligence disaster in decades. Investigators believe Jerry Lee's fingerprints are all over it, somewhere in the mountains of evidence. The clock is ticking. Lee has 6 hours of freedom left before the Federal Bureau of Investigation sees everything. The foundation of Jerry Chun Shing Lee's path to espionage began decades before that Honolulu layover. Born in Hong Kong in 1964, Lee grew up between two worlds. His family immigrated to Hawaii when he was still young. He attended American schools and learned perfect English. He absorbed American culture while maintaining deep connections to his Chinese heritage. After graduating high school, Lee enlisted in the United States Army in 1982. He served 4 years, receiving an honorable discharge in 1986. The military instilled discipline and gave him security clearances. It also gave him something invaluable for his future career, a clean record. This meant no red flags and no questionable associations. He was simply a hard-working immigrant kid who served his country and wanted more. Lee enrolled at Hawaii Pacific University and earned his bachelor's degree in international business management in 1992. 1 year later, he completed a master's degree in human resource management. His academic record showed a man with ambition and capability. He was a man who could navigate complex organizational structures. He was also a man who understood how institutions worked. In 1994, at age 30, Jerry Lee joined the Central Intelligence Agency. The recruitment process had been rigorous. This process included multiple polygraph examinations, extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and financial scrutiny. Lee passed everything. The Central Intelligence Agency saw in him what they always sought. He was a bilingual officer with cultural fluency in a priority target region. He was someone who could operate in Chinese-speaking environments without standing out. He also understood both American and Asian mentalities. The agency trained him at Camp Peary in Virginia. This was the legendary facility known within the intelligence community as the Farm. There, Lee learned various elements of tradecraft. This included surveillance detection routes, dead drops, brush passes, and covert communications. He learned how to recruit and handle human intelligence sources. He also learned how to operate in hostile environments. A single mistake there could mean death for his assets or imprisonment for himself. Lee's career at the Central Intelligence Agency spanned 13 years. He worked as a case officer, the agency's term for operatives who recruit and run foreign spies. His assignments took him to multiple overseas posts, though the specific locations remained classified. What is known from court documents is that Lee worked extensively in regions connected to China operations. His job gave him access to some of the Central Intelligence Agency's most closely guarded secrets. These included the true names of Chinese nationals spying for America. He also knew the locations of covert Central Intelligence Agency facilities abroad. Furthermore, he understood the operational methods used to communicate with assets deep inside the Chinese government. He knew the specific weaknesses in Chinese security that the Central Intelligence Agency exploited. Every case officer maintains operational notes. These records include details of meetings with sources, telephone numbers for emergency contacts, and addresses of safe houses. They also include intelligence provided by assets during debriefings. Lee kept meticulous records. These included a 2002-day planner filled with handwritten notes and an address book containing phone numbers and true names. These materials were classified at levels up to top secret. The information they contained, if exposed, could unravel entire networks. Throughout his Central Intelligence Agency career, Lee signed multiple non-disclosure agreements. Each one clearly stated that classified information remained classified after he left government service. Each one explained the criminal penalties under Title 18, United States Code Sections 793 and 794. These included Espionage Act violations, carrying penalties of potential life imprisonment. On July 13, 2007, as Lee prepared to resign from the Central Intelligence Agency, he signed a security exit form. The language was unambiguous. It stated that he had no classified material in his possession, custody, or control at that time. This statement, however, was a lie. Lee was about to walk out of Central Intelligence Agency headquarters with notebooks containing some of America's deepest secrets about intelligence operations in China. But at that moment, in the summer of 2007, no one knew. Lee's security clearance was terminated. He received his final paycheck. He flew to Hong Kong and started building a new life. Hong Kong in 2007 offered opportunities for a former intelligence officer with Jerry Lee's skills. The city served as Asia's financial hub. It was a place where East met West, where money flowed freely, and where connections mattered more than credentials. Lee quickly found employment with Japan Tobacco International, one of the world's largest tobacco companies. His job title was investigator on the brand integrity team. On paper, the job sounded legitimate. It involved investigating counterfeit cigarettes and tracking smuggling operations. He was also to work with law enforcement across Asia to protect the company's intellectual property. However, former colleagues who worked with Lee at Japan Tobacco would later describe something unsettling. Operations would proceed normally until Lee learned the details. Then things would change. A planned raid on a smuggling operation in China would result in an empty warehouse. A contract investigator sent to the mainland on a case would disappear into Chinese custody. Shipments that should have been seized would somehow vanish. Suspicions grew within the company's security department. Someone was leaking operational details to Chinese authorities. The pattern centered on cases where Jerry Lee had access to the intelligence. In June 2009, Japan Tobacco International terminated Lee's employment. The official reason remained vague in corporate records. However, according to a former executive who spoke with the South China Morning Post, the company suspected Lee was compromised. They could not prove it, but they did not need ironclad proof to fire him. They just needed to protect their operations. Lee was out. His termination did not end his relationship with the tobacco company immediately. He continued receiving payments through May 2010. The records do not specify whether these were severance or consulting fees. By mid-2010, those payments stopped. Lee needed income and new opportunities. That is when Chinese intelligence made their move. The approach happened on April 26, 2010, in Shenzhen, China. Jerry Lee sat in a meeting arranged by his business associate. This Hong Kong resident would later serve as an intermediary between Lee and his handlers. Two men joined the meeting. They spoke fluent Cantonese. They were professional and polite. They told Lee they were aware of his background. They said they worked in the same field he used to work in. Lee understood immediately. These were intelligence officers with China's Ministry of State Security. This is also known as the MSS. The MSS is the civilian intelligence agency responsible for counterintelligence, foreign intelligence collection, and internal political security. The two officers, later identified in court documents as unindicted co-conspirators 1 and 2, made Lee an offer. They had prepared a gift for him, $100,000 in cash. They would take care of him for life. All they wanted in return was his cooperation, his knowledge, and his access to American intelligence secrets. Lee sat across the table from two Chinese intelligence officers who were offering him a fortune for betraying his country. He could have walked away. He could have immediately reported the contact to American authorities. Former intelligence officers receive clear instructions. If a foreign intelligence service approaches you, report it. Do not engage. Do not negotiate. Simply report it. Lee did report the contact, but only partially. On May 11, 2010, while overseas, Lee met with a Central Intelligence Agency officer. He mentioned that Chinese intelligence officers had approached him. However, he left out crucial details. He did not mention the $100,000 cash gift. He did not mention the offer to take care of him for life. He did not mention that he was considering accepting. 3 days later, on May 14, 2010, Jerry Lee walked into an HSBC bank branch in Hong Kong. He made a cash deposit into his personal account. The deposit totaled 138,000 Hong Kong dollars. This was approximately 17,468 United States dollars. It was the first payment. Over the next 3.5 years, Lee would deposit hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash into his HSBC accounts. This money could not be explained by his legitimate business ventures. It arrived in envelopes delivered by his business associate. This was money paid by Chinese intelligence for American secrets. The taskings began arriving in May 2010. Written requests were contained in envelopes. Lee's business associate would deliver them. Sometimes these envelopes included small gifts. Other times they contained only the taskings. The Chinese intelligence officers wanted specific information. They sent Lee at least 21 different requests. This operation continued into at least 2011. The requests were not random. They were surgical and precise. These questions aimed to map American intelligence capabilities in China. One tasking asked Lee to identify locations. These locations were where the Central Intelligence Agency would assign officers with specific types of experience. Another request sought details about particular Central Intelligence Agency facilities abroad. A third tasking requested information about certain assets Lee had handled. The requests also included floor plans of covert Central Intelligence Agency installations. They sought the names and contact information of Central Intelligence Agency case officers. These officers worked in sensitive positions. The Chinese were not merely fishing for data. They knew exactly what they wanted. They also knew Lee could provide it. On May 26, 2010, Jerry Lee sat in his Hong Kong residence. He opened his laptop computer. He began typing a document in response to 2 taskings from the Chinese officers. This document describes specific locations where the Central Intelligence Agency assigned officers. It also detailed the particular location and time frame of a sensitive Central Intelligence Agency operation. Furthermore, it included specific information about operational security measures. Lee was not relying on memory alone. He drew from his extensive expertise. This included his years of operational experience. It also included his intimate knowledge of how the Central Intelligence Agency functioned. When he finished writing, Lee transferred the document from his laptop to a thumb drive. This was a small, easily concealed device. It was simple to pass during a brief meeting. The document contained information classified at the secret level. Unauthorized disclosure of this information could cause serious damage to national security. Lee had just committed a federal crime. This included unauthorized retention and preparation of national defense information. His intent was to transmit this to a foreign power. It also included conspiracy to commit espionage. The summer of 2010 brought more contact between Lee and his handlers. They exchanged emails using coded language. For example, they would ask if there was any news from their friends. They might also ask about a meeting with their friends in China. Lee's response to such queries was often positive. These communications used email accounts created specifically for covert contact. On July 12, 2010, Lee emailed his business associate. He asked about meetings with their friends. The associate replied that he had not yet heard from the Chinese friends. He then asked if Lee had. Lee responded that it was acceptable if no action was taken at that time. He confirmed he would maintain contact with their friends. The next day, July 13th, the business associate emailed Lee with news. He had received a call from one of the Chinese intelligence officers. The officer was coming to Hong Kong soon. He wanted to meet to discuss further arrangements. Lee's response was immediate and enthusiastic. The operation was active and money continued to flow. Lee kept providing information. In response to another tasking that summer, Lee drew a sketch. It was the floor plan of a particular Central Intelligence Agency facility located abroad. This included sensitive architectural details and security measures. It also showed entry points and exit routes. This kind of information would allow hostile intelligence services to conduct surveillance. It could also help them plan operations against American personnel. Every piece of information Lee provided helped Chinese intelligence understand how the Central Intelligence Agency operated. Every detail exposed vulnerabilities. Every name put lives at risk. Meanwhile, in Beijing, at the headquarters of the Ministry of State Security, analysts were active. They were piecing together a comprehensive picture of American espionage operations targeting China. This picture was devastating. It was about to get much worse. Between late 2010 and the end of 2012, the Central Intelligence Agency experienced an intelligence catastrophe in China. The agency's network of human sources began to disappear. This network had been carefully built over years of dangerous recruitment operations. Assets stopped showing up for meetings. Communications went silent. Then came the reports of disaster. Sources were arrested. Others were imprisoned. Some sources were executed. The losses mounted with horrifying speed. By the end of 2012, at least 18 to 20 Central Intelligence Agency sources in China had been killed or imprisoned. Some estimates placed the number higher, possibly as many as 30. Current and former American officials later described this as was one of the worst intelligence breaches in decades. The damage rivaled losses caused by Aldrich Ames. Ames was a Central Intelligence Agency officer who spied for the Soviet Union and Russia for 9 years. The damage also rivaled that caused by Robert Hanssen. Hanssen was a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent who betrayed American secrets for over 20 years. In one particularly brutal case, a Central Intelligence Agency source was executed in a government courtyard. He was shot in front of his colleagues. The message was clear for all to see. This is what happens to those who betray China. This is what happens to spies. The execution was designed to maximize fear and deter others. It also demonstrated that China's security apparatus could identify and eliminate American spies with impunity. Inside Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in Langley, Virginia, panic set in. Senior agency officials realized they had a massive problem by early 2011. Assets were vanishing rapidly. The flow of intelligence from China, once robust and detailed, had dried up. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Central Intelligence Agency opened a joint counterintelligence investigation. They established a secret office in Northern Virginia. The operation was codenamed Honey Badger. The Honey Badger investigation team faced two competing theories. These theories addressed what had caused the disaster. Some investigators believed the Chinese had cracked the encrypted covert communications system. The Central Intelligence Agency used this system to contact its assets. The system was designed to be secure. It aimed to prevent hostile intelligence services from identifying Central Intelligence Agency sources. This was true even if communications were intercepted. However, if the Chinese had found a vulnerability, they could have traced the communications. A flaw in the encryption or its implementation would allow this. Every asset using the system would then have been exposed. Other investigators suspected a mole. This was a traitor inside the Central Intelligence Agency. This individual had access to source identities and sold that information to Chinese intelligence. The mole theory made sense to many. Human penetration explained more than just the loss of sources. It also explained the precision with which Chinese intelligence had rolled up the networks. The debate between the two camps grew bitter. The Central Intelligence Agency's top spy hunter, Mark Kelton, initially resisted the mole theory. Kelton had personal reasons for his skepticism. He had been close friends with Brian Kelly, a Central Intelligence Agency officer. The Federal Bureau of Investigation wrongly suspected Kelly of being a Russian mole in the 1990s. The real traitor turned out to be Robert Hansen. Kelton remembered his friend's mistreatment. He remembered the damage done by false accusations. He told colleagues he would not accuse someone without ironclad evidence. Other investigators pointed to operational security failures. Central Intelligence Agency handlers in Beijing had become sloppy. They traveled the same routes to the same meeting points too frequently. China's vast surveillance network could have identified these patterns. This network included millions of cameras and thousands of security personnel. Some officers met sources at a restaurant. Chinese intelligence had planted listening devices there. Even the waiters worked for the Ministry of State Security. This carelessness, combined with potential technical vulnerabilities, could explain the losses. However, the scale and speed of the disaster suggested something more than sloppy tradecraft. By 2011, investigators began focusing on Jerry Chun Shing Lee. Lee fit the profile. He was Chinese-American. He was a former Central Intelligence Agency case officer. He had extensive access to China operations. Lee left the agency in 2007. This was shortly before the intelligence losses began. He moved to Hong Kong, where he could easily meet with Chinese intelligence officers. Lee also had access to the kind of information that was being compromised. Financial records showed suspicious activity. Bank deposits could not be explained by his legitimate income. The Federal Bureau of Investigation obtained authorization to conduct surveillance. They tracked Lee's movements. They monitored his communications. They built a case piece by piece. However, they still needed physical evidence. In 2012, the Federal Bureau of Investigation hatched a plan. They would lure Lee back to the United States with a job offer. The Central Intelligence Agency would interview him for potential reemployment. This was a common arrangement for former officers. Sometimes they returned to the agency as contractors. This was especially true if they had specialized regional expertise. Lee had applied for such positions. The agency invited him to Virginia for interviews. Lee took the bait. In March 2012, Lee flew to Virginia. He attended his first interview session at Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in McLean. During the interview on March 8th, Lee was asked about his travel to China. He lied to the interviewers. He told them he had not traveled to China for approximately 2 years. This statement was false. Lee had been traveling to China regularly. He met with his handlers during these trips. In April 2012, someone used an Internet protocol address that resolved to Guangzhou, China. This person created an email account. The email address included one of Lee's daughter's names. This was one of several covert communication accounts. The Chinese intelligence officers had set these up for Lee. These methods allowed them to contact him without using his regular email or phone. The accounts were compartmented. They were difficult to trace back to him. From June 4th through 8th, 2012, Lee returned to Virginia. He attended additional interviews at Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in McLean. He brought supporting documents with him. These included financial statements for his company, FTM International. This was the cigarette import business he had registered in Hong Kong. The statements claimed the company had approximately $2,078,146.64 Hong Kong dollars. This was in its HSBC bank account as of April 30th, 2012. However, the financial statement was a forgery. The actual account balance was approximately $78,146.64 Hong Kong dollars. Lee had inflated the balance by $2 million. He falsely claimed FTM International was profitable. In reality, the company was actually losing money. He continued to lie about his travel to China. Lee insisted he had not been there since April 2010. That was when the Chinese officers first contacted him. Every lie created additional exposure for Lee. Every false statement was a federal crime. This included lying to the Central Intelligence Agency during a reemployment investigation. It also included providing fraudulent financial documents to federal employees. However, Lee believed he was being clever. He thought he was covering his tracks effectively. On June 6, 2012, Lee checked into a hotel in Vienna, Virginia. Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance teams watched him enter his room. Agents later found a piece of hotel stationery inside his luggage during a search. On it, Lee had handwritten a phone number provided by his Chinese handlers. He had also written an abbreviated version of the covert email address. This was physical evidence directly connecting him to the Chinese intelligence operation. 2 months later, in July 2012, Lee traveled to Guangzhou, China. He went there to meet his handlers and receive new taskings. He also collected more payments. Lee returned to Hong Kong and prepared for another trip to the United States. In August, he would make the journey that would eventually destroy him. August 10th through 15th, 2012. Jerry Lee flew from Hong Kong to Virginia. He had a layover in Honolulu, Hawaii. He packed his rolling suitcase. He included items he believed he would need for more interviews with the Central Intelligence Agency. These included business casual clothing, his laptop, and his phone. He also packed 2 notebooks. These notebooks would later prove his undoing. The first was a 2002-day planner. It had a blue cover. The planner was small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. Inside, page after page contained handwritten notes. These notes were in Lee's distinctive script. The notes detailed Central Intelligence Agency operational meetings with assets. They listed true names of Chinese nationals spying for America. They included phone numbers for emergency contacts. Addresses of covert facilities were also present. Meeting locations across China were detailed. Information about intelligence provided by sources during debriefings was also included. Every entry was classified. Some were at the secret level. Others were at top secret. The second notebook was an address book. It was a similar size. Its contents were equally damning. It contained true names and phone numbers of Central Intelligence Agency assets. Addresses of Central Intelligence Agency facilities abroad were listed. The contact information for covert Central Intelligence Agency employees was also present. Together, the 2 notebooks represented a comprehensive guide to American intelligence operations. These operations specifically targeted China. In the wrong hands, they offered a roadmap to destroying an entire spy network. Lee also packed a thumb drive. This small electronic storage device contained a document. He had created the document on May 26, 2010. He had transferred this document from his laptop. This was in response to Chinese intelligence taskings. Lee thought he had deleted the file. He believed it was gone from the device. He did not understand how computer forensics worked. When a file is deleted, the operating system removes its reference from the directory. However, the actual data remains on the drive. It stays there until new data overwrites it. Forensic specialists can recover deleted files. They use specialized software to access unallocated space. The document was still there. It was waiting to be discovered. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been waiting for this moment. They had obtained a warrant. They had surveillance in place. When Lee's flight landed in Honolulu on August 15th, the agents tracked him to his hotel. Lee checked in and unpacked. He then went out for dinner. While he was gone, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents entered his hotel room. They had authority from a search warrant signed by a federal judge. They worked quickly and professionally. The agents photographed everything. They opened the suitcase and found the 2 notebooks. High-resolution cameras were used to photograph every page. Every entry, every name, every phone number, and every address was recorded. They found the thumb drive in his luggage. They forensically imaged it using specialized equipment. This created a complete copy of everything on the device. This included data in the unallocated space. The agents also found a piece of hotel stationery from Vienna. It had handwritten phone numbers. They documented its location in his bag. They photographed it from multiple angles. The search took several hours. When they finished, they replaced everything exactly as they had found it. They then left the room. Lee returned from dinner and went to sleep. The next morning, he boarded his connecting flight to Virginia. He had no idea what had just happened. He did not know the Federal Bureau of Investigation now possessed copies of his deepest secrets. He had no idea his notebooks had just exposed him as a traitor. The Federal Bureau of Investigation forensics team worked around the clock. They analyzed the material. The notebooks were a gold mine of information. They contained details only someone with Lee's level of access would possess. This information could have identified and eliminated Central Intelligence Agency sources in China. The details matched intelligence losses from 2010 through 2012. The thumb drive analysis revealed the deleted document. This document was from May 26, 2010. It was a classified document. It described Central Intelligence Agency operational assignments and facilities. Lee created this document in response to Chinese intelligence taskings. The evidence was overwhelming. However, the Federal Bureau of Investigation needed more. They needed Lee's statements. They needed to hear what he would say when confronted with this evidence. Lee completed his interviews at Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in Virginia in August 2012. The agency did not offer him a job. Instead, they scheduled more follow-up interviews for December. From December 3rd through 7th, 2012, Lee returned to Virginia. This was for another round of discussions about potential reemployment. During these sessions, held in Falls Church, Virginia, Lee continued lying. He falsely claimed he had not traveled back to China since April 2010. This lie was easily disproven. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had surveillance footage and travel records. They also had hotel receipts. This evidence showed multiple trips to Guangzhou and Shenzhen. However, the interviewers did not confront him yet. They allowed him to lie. Each false statement dug his hole deeper. In February 2013, Lee received an email. It arrived at a covert account the Chinese had set up. The email came from the same address, indicating someone was sending a message to themselves. This was a technique for passing information without directly emailing another person. The subject line asked about Christina. The message itself was coded. It expressed concern about Christina's progress and noted a lack of recent updates. Christina was Lee's daughter. Gradebook was code for intelligence reporting. The Chinese handlers were asking why Lee had not provided information recently. They were growing impatient. They wanted their money's worth. On May 22, 2013, Federal Bureau of Investigation special agents interviewed Lee in Washington, D.C. They showed him the document from the thumb drive. This was the classified secret-level document from May 26, 2010. Lee looked at it. He confirmed it contained Central Intelligence Agency information. Then he lied. He denied creating the document. He claimed not to know who wrote it. He denied knowing why it would have been on his computer. He also denied deleting it from the thumb drive. The agents let him talk. They documented everything. 1 week later, Lee agreed to another interview. This time, confronted with additional evidence, he changed his story. He admitted he created the document. He also admitted he wrote it in response to 2 taskings. These taskings came from Chinese intelligence officers. He admitted he transferred it to the thumb drive. However, he insisted he only thought about giving it to the Chinese officers. He claimed he never actually did so. This was another lie. The pattern was clear. First, he would deny. When denial became impossible, he would minimize his actions. He would claim he intended to betray his country but did not complete the act. The Federal Bureau of Investigation knew better. The Federal Bureau of Investigation continued building their case. This work spanned throughout 2013 and into the following years. They documented the bank deposits. More than $840,000 in suspicious cash deposits were made into Lee's Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation accounts. These deposits occurred between May 2010 and December 2013. The agents interviewed former colleagues. They obtained records from Japan Tobacco International. These records showed suspicions about Lee's conduct. They tracked down the business associate. This individual served as Lee's intermediary with Chinese intelligence. In May 2013, Chinese intelligence officers approached a former Central Intelligence Agency employee. This occurred outside the United States. 2 men identified themselves as being in the same line of work as intelligence officers. They asked detailed questions about locations where she had worked. They also inquired about assets she had handled for the Central Intelligence Agency. Her operational history was also questioned. These questions matched information that Jerry Lee would have known. This was information Lee had access to during his Central Intelligence Agency career. It was also information the Chinese intelligence officers had tasked him to provide. The former employee, referred to in court documents as Cooperating Witness 1, reported the contact to American authorities. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. By 2014, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had enough evidence for an indictment. However, they faced a problem. Lee was living in Hong Kong. He rarely traveled to the United States. Extradition from Hong Kong was difficult. This was particularly true in espionage cases. The Chinese government could exert pressure in such situations. Therefore, the Federal Bureau of Investigation needed to lure him back to American soil. In 2017, they created another opportunity. This was for a potential job with a security contractor. It gave Lee another reason to fly to the United States. Lee took the bait again. He booked a flight from Hong Kong to New York. The date was January 15, 2018. The trap was set. It was 7:15 in the evening on January 15, 2018. This was at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Terminal 4. Flights from Hong Kong were arriving. Jerry Chun Shing Lee, who was now 53 years old, walked through the jetway. He carried his luggage. He then approached customs. Special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation waited near the customs area. They had coordinated with Customs and Border Protection. Lee cleared customs. He walked into the terminal. The agents approached him. They asked if he was Jerry Chun Shing Lee. He confirmed his identity. The agents then informed him he was under arrest. Lee was placed in handcuffs. He was read his Miranda rights. He was then transported to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Queens. The arrest made immediate news. Reports stated that a former Central Intelligence Agency officer was arrested at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The charges included unlawful retention of classified national defense information. The criminal complaint was filed in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. It detailed the evidence. This included the notebooks found during the August 2012 hotel search in Honolulu. It also cited the thumb drive with the deleted classified document. The pattern of cash deposits totaling more than $840,000 was noted. His lies to Federal Bureau of Investigation agents during multiple interviews were also detailed. Finally, the covert communications with Chinese intelligence officers were included. Lee was held without bond. Authorities deemed him too dangerous to release. He was considered too likely to flee. He also posed too much of a national security threat. He was transported to Virginia to face charges in federal court in Alexandria. The case was assigned to Senior United States District Judge T.S. Ellis III. Judge Ellis was a Reagan appointee. He was known for his sharp courtroom management and tough sentencing in national security cases. Lee pleaded not guilty. His defense attorneys argued the government's case was circumstantial. They claimed Lee kept the notebooks for sentimental reasons. They suggested the money came from legitimate business activities. They also argued there was no direct evidence Lee actually transmitted classified information to Chinese intelligence. It was a weak defense. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. On May 8, 2018, a grand jury in Alexandria returned a superseding indictment. This indictment listed 3 counts. Count 1 charged conspiracy to gather or deliver defense information. This was intended to aid a foreign government. It violated Title 18, United States Code, Section 794. The maximum sentence for this offense was life imprisonment. Count 2 accused unlawful retention of national defense information. This included a 2002-day planner with top secret and secret information. This count violated Title 18, United States Code, Section 793. Its maximum sentence was 10 years imprisonment. Count 3 also involved unlawful retention of national defense information. Specifically, this was an address book containing secret information. This count fell under the same statute and carried the same maximum sentence. The indictment was detailed. It spanned 21 pages. It laid out the full timeline of the conspiracy. This included an April 26, 2010 meeting in Shenzhen. A $100,000 cash offer followed. Taskings were sent through Lee's business associate. The indictment also noted a May 26, 2010 classified document. Cash deposits into Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation accounts were listed. Furthermore, it detailed lies told to Central Intelligence Agency and Federal Bureau of Investigation interviewers. Finally, it described covert email accounts. This indictment covered every detail of the conspiracy. Lee's attorneys requested a trial date. Judge Ellis set it for May 2019. However, as the trial date approached, something changed. Lee's legal team began discussing a potential plea agreement with federal prosecutors. The government had overwhelming evidence against him. For instance, the notebooks alone proved unlawful retention of classified information. Bank deposits established a clear financial motive. Additionally, his lies demonstrated consciousness of guilt. If Lee went to trial and lost, he faced potential life imprisonment under Count 1. This conspiracy to commit espionage charge carried the harshest penalty. Prosecutors from the Department of Justice National Security Division met with Lee's attorneys. They discussed the terms of an agreement. On May 1, 2019, Jerry Chun Shing Lee appeared before Judge Ellis. He changed his plea to guilty for Count 1. This count charged conspiracy to deliver national defense information to aid a foreign government. In exchange, the government agreed to dismiss Counts 2 and 3 at sentencing. Lee admitted in open court that he conspired with Chinese intelligence officers. He acknowledged receiving more than $840,000 from them. He confessed to creating classified documents in response to their taskings. He accepted responsibility for retaining classified notebooks after leaving the Central Intelligence Agency. His sentencing was scheduled for November. On November 22, 2019, the United States District Courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, hosted a significant event. The sentencing hearing for Jerry Chun Shing Lee began at 10 in the morning in the courtroom of Judge T.S. Ellis III. Assistant United States Attorney Neil Hammerstrom represented the government. Trial attorneys Patrick Murphy and Adam Small from the National Security Division sat at the prosecution table. Lee sat with his defense team. His wife and children, along with other family members, filled several rows of the courtroom gallery. Their faces showed the strain of nearly 2 years since his arrest. Hammerstrom stood to present the government's sentencing recommendation. He addressed Judge Ellis directly. Hammerstrom stated that the defendant betrayed his country for money. He sold out the men and women who trusted him with their lives. He provided information to a hostile intelligence service. This led to the deaths of American sources. The prosecutor described the extensive scope of the damage. He reported that at least 18 to 20 Central Intelligence Agency sources were killed or imprisoned. The actual number might be as many as 30. This intelligence disaster set back American operations in China by years. Furthermore, billions of dollars in intelligence infrastructure were compromised. Hammerstrom detailed the compelling evidence. This included notebooks containing the true names of assets. There were also $840,000 in suspicious cash deposits. He presented the classified document created in response to Chinese taskings. The evidence also showed a pattern of lies spanning from 2012 through 2018. The government recommended a sentence at the high end of the advisory guidelines. Hammerstrom told the judge that Lee deserved decades in prison. He emphasized that this was one of the most serious espionage cases in recent history. Lee's defense attorney then rose to respond. He acknowledged his client's guilt. He did not dispute the severity of the offense. However, he asked the judge to consider several mitigating factors. These factors included Lee's 13 years of service to the Central Intelligence Agency before his betrayal. His cooperation after pleading guilty was also a factor. Furthermore, he highlighted his family's reliance on him. The defense attorney argued for leniency. He requested a sentence far below a life term. He sought an outcome that would give Lee hope of eventual release. Judge T.S. Ellis III listened to both sides. He reviewed the presentence investigation report. He also examined the evidence presented during the plea proceedings. Then he spoke. Judge Ellis was known for his blunt assessments. He did not soften his words. He looked directly at Lee. Ellis told Lee that he had a duty to protect this nation's secrets. He asserted that Lee violated that duty in the most egregious way. Lee sold information to a foreign power. That information led to the deaths of people who trusted America to protect them. Ellis concluded that Lee did this for money, motivated by pure greed. The judge then addressed the argument that Lee never actually transmitted the classified document on the thumb drive to Chinese intelligence. Ellis stated that this argument was irrelevant. He explained that Lee created the document in response to their taskings. Lee transferred it to a portable device for ease of transmission. He also possessed it while traveling to meet with handlers. Therefore, the conspiracy was complete regardless of whether the final handoff occurred. Ellis noted the $840,000 in cash deposits. He stated that the money did not come from legitimate business. Instead, it came from Chinese intelligence in exchange for betraying his country. Ellis emphasized that every dollar represented blood money. The judge considered the sentencing guidelines. The advisory range suggested a substantial prison term. Ellis then announced his decision. He sentenced Lee to 19 years, or 228 months in federal prison. Lee would also pay a $50,000 fine. Upon release, he would serve 3 years of supervised probation. Judge Ellis made clear this sentence reflected the severity of the betrayal. The judge stated that this sentence sent a message to current and former intelligence officers. He warned that if they betrayed their country, they would spend decades in prison. Lee stood emotionless as the sentence was pronounced. His family members cried quietly in the gallery. His wife covered her face. The marshals approached. Lee was handcuffed. He was then led out of the courtroom. His destination was federal prison. At age 55, Lee would be 74 years old when released, assuming good behavior credit. Most of his remaining productive life would be spent behind bars. The sentencing of Jerry Chun Shing Lee marked the conclusion of one of the most significant counterintelligence investigations in recent American history. Assistant Attorney General for National Security John Demers held a press conference outside the courthouse after the sentencing. Demers told reporters that in just over 1 year, the government had convicted 3 Americans. They were convicted for committing espionage offenses on behalf of the Chinese government. Each of them had now received a sentence of at least a decade. Demers added that sadly all 3 were former members of the United States intelligence community. He stressed that these convictions and sentences would send a strong message to current and former security clearance holders. He warned them to be aware that the Chinese government targets them. Furthermore, he stated that if they betrayed the United States, the Department of Justice would hold them accountable. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, John Brown, issued a statement. He emphasized the severity of Lee's actions. Brown stated that Mr. Lee served as a Central Intelligence Agency officer. He was entrusted with extremely sensitive national security information. Brown explained that Lee broke that trust with no regard for the consequences. His actions aided a foreign government. They hurt American national security and jeopardized the safety of his former intelligence colleagues. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took such acts of betrayal very seriously. They would be relentless in pursuing these cases. The damage assessment continued long after Lee's sentencing. Intelligence officials conducted extensive reviews of every operation Lee had access to during his Central Intelligence Agency career. They identified which sources might have been compromised by information in his notebooks. They evaluated whether any ongoing operations needed to be shut down due to potential exposure. The Central Intelligence Agency worked to rebuild its human intelligence networks in China. This effort would take years and cost millions of dollars. Recruiting sources deep inside the Chinese government required patience, tradecraft, and most importantly, trust. After the catastrophic losses of 2010 through 2012, convincing Chinese nationals to spy for America became exponentially harder. Potential recruits knew what happened to the previous generation of American spies. They knew about the executions and the risks. Many refused to cooperate. Jerry Lee is currently serving his sentence in federal prison. His Bureau of Prisons register number is publicly available through the inmate locator system. His projected release date, factoring in good time credit, falls in 2037. He will be 73 years old at that time. His family visits when they can. However, the travel from Hong Kong to American federal prisons is expensive and logistically difficult. Lee's wife has maintained that she knew nothing about his espionage activities. She believed his business ventures were legitimate. She trusted him when he explained the cash deposits as business income. There is no evidence suggesting she was complicit in the conspiracy. The case raised broader questions about Chinese intelligence operations. Specifically, it highlighted targeting of former American spies. Lee was not the only one. In 2019, Alexander Yuk-Ching Ma, a former Central Intelligence Agency officer, was arrested. He was charged with conspiring to spy for China. Previously, in 2018, Kevin Patrick Mallory, another former Central Intelligence Agency officer and Defense Intelligence Agency operative, was convicted. He received a 20-year prison sentence for espionage on behalf of China. The pattern was clear. China's Ministry of State Security actively recruited former American intelligence officers. They offered money, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. They exploited financial difficulties. They also leveraged cultural connections and waited patiently for opportunities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and Central Intelligence Agency implemented new security measures. These included enhanced monitoring of former officers living abroad. They also introduced more frequent security reviews. Stricter controls on classified materials during the exit process were put in place. Better training on how to recognize and report foreign intelligence approaches became standard. However, the fundamental problem remained. Former officers carried valuable information in their heads. This information could not be erased by signing exit forms. It was information that hostile intelligence services would pay fortunes to obtain. The American intelligence community learned painful lessons from the Jerry Lee case. They learned about the dangers of insider threats. They also learned about the vulnerabilities created when former officers relocated to regions where hostile services operated freely. Furthermore, they understood the necessity of vigilant counterintelligence. Most importantly, they learned about the human cost of betrayal. At least 20 men and women risked everything to help America gather intelligence in China. They paid with their lives or their freedom. Some were executed. Others were imprisoned for decades in Chinese jails. Conditions in these jails are brutal, and legal protections are non-existent. Their families never learned why their loved ones disappeared. They never got closure. They never received justice. Jerry Lee sold those lives for $840,000. He reduced human beings to a price tag. He destroyed families for cash. He betrayed everything the Central Intelligence Agency stood for because he wanted money for a comfortable lifestyle in Hong Kong. The notebooks became the most damning physical evidence in the case. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation found them in Lee's luggage. This happened during an August 2012 hotel search in Honolulu. Prosecutors displayed photographs of pages from the notebooks during court proceedings. The handwriting was clearly Lee's. The information was unmistakably classified. The notebooks proved Lee walked out of Central Intelligence Agency headquarters. This happened in July 2007. He had no legal right to possess these materials. He had signed a statement swearing he did not have them. These materials contained operational details. Their value was immeasurable. Those notebooks sit now in a Federal Bureau of Investigation evidence facility. They are filed as exhibits in the case of United States versus Jerry Chun Shing Lee. This is criminal number 118, criminal 89. The case is in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. They serve as physical reminders of one man's betrayal. They also show the system's failure to stop him before he could do catastrophic damage. If you found this investigation compelling, please hit the like button. It helps the algorithm show this content to more people. These people appreciate deep dives into real espionage cases. Subscribe to the channel for more documentaries. These documentaries cover intelligence operations, counterintelligence investigations, and the hidden world of spies and secrets. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Did the Federal Bureau of Investigation handle this investigation properly? Should they have arrested Lee earlier? Could the Central Intelligence Agency have prevented his access to those notebooks when he left in July 2007? What safeguards should exist to prevent future cases like this? Your perspectives matter. They contribute to important conversations about national security. Share this video with anyone interested in intelligence history. Also share it with those interested in espionage cases or true crime stories involving government betrayal. The story of Jerry Lee represents more than one man's greed. It represents systemic vulnerabilities in how America protects its most sensitive secrets. Understanding these cases helps citizens comprehend the real stakes involved in intelligence work. It also helps them understand the genuine threats posed by foreign espionage services. Thank you for watching this documentary investigation. Stay vigilant, stay informed. Remember that freedom depends on the courage of those who protect our secrets. It also depends on the integrity of those trusted with classified information. Jerry Lee failed that trust. 20 people died because of his betrayal. Their memories deserve to be honored. This means ensuring we never forget the cost of espionage.